Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, hi. I'm now going to start the proceedings of this webinar. Welcome back. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining me today for this webinar. The topic is Criteria 3 of NBA Accreditation COPO attainment. And I'm going to actually refer to the specification time to time and kind of address, in my opinion, what is needed to be done. Some of the key terms will be explained by me and how it could be implemented, how the computation of COPO can be done, how the course outcome attainment could be transferred to the program outcome, how it is to be processed before you transfer it to the program outcomes is also covered, and that will complete the discussion about criteria 1. The disclaimer here is that uh, although I am referring to tier 2 specification of NBA accreditation, which I believe is written in details in when it comes to criteria 3. The tier 1 specification doesn't specify any specific strategy to or methodology to compute the COPOs, but it's always the tier one colleges also may go ahead and adopt this framework defined for tier two, because what is expected is that tier one autonomous colleges and private universities figure out their own ways of computation of course outcomes attainment and PO program outcome attainment. And that's why a kind of a freedom is given to the autonomous colleges, and nothing is specifically mentioned there, but it doesn't mean that they cannot adopt the framework defined in tier 2 specification. If they believe that that's the rational way of implementation of COP or attainment computation, they may adopt this framework defined in tier 2. So that's why I'm referring to this, because it is very commonly applicable framework for all types of institutions. So let's start with this. 3.1 is to do with establishing the correlation between the courses and the POCs. It is also called as um, the course articulation matrix. So here, look at the way the course has to be defined. It should represent the batch, the code of the course, and the name of the course clearly. And then there has to be a way to identify the course outcome. So idea is that you could distinguishly you could identify all the course outcomes from one batch to other batch, or one course to other course in the same semester, same term, same batch. And typically, what is done by the teachers is that when they create a course file, they write the course outcomes as CO1, CO2, CO3, CO4. But the other teachers also follow the same thing. And then when it comes to comparing between the batches, or comparing within the semester, also you need to then have a distinguishing identity to each CO, and that's why you must define the way to identify each CO independently for each course. So you may append it with your course code if you want, right? Or some other way, standard practice that you would like to follow there. Also, decisions have to be taken by the program director or somebody who is supposed to design the program. And then, this is the way you come out with your set of course outcomes, and then you map it with your program outcomes. Now, when it comes to the correlation between the courses and the POCs, the COPO metric has to be defined as per the table given in the NBA manual. Let me open that here. So this is what is covered by us in the first slide. The course name, right? and then the COs have to be identified like this, and the statements of the COs. This is what we have covered in 3.1.1, which I have shown you here. This is the way it could be done. Now the next is 3.1.2, which talks about COPA matrices of the courses selected in 3.1.1, and then map those with the program outcomes. So these are the courses, and these are the program outcomes, and then the degree of affinity could be slight, moderate, substantial. Now the problem here is that nothing is mentioned about how to arrive at whether or not this affinity is slight, moderate, or substantial. There is nothing mentioned here. So it is left to you to figure out how would you define this relationship, right? So you will have to then come out with some logical way of interpreting the relationship between the program and the course outcome. So typically, as you know, a course may have association with multiple POs, right? It is impossible to have a course to have association with all the POs. I have seen that it is done by some of the institutions, but that is absolutely incorrect, because it is impossible to have a course to have association with all the POs in that program, unless there is only one exception there, and that is a capstone project. If you have your last semester of the program completely dedicated to a project which encompasses all the courses taught to the students in the previous semesters, then I would agree that the course outcomes of such a program, such a project, would have mapping with all the POs. Otherwise, it is not possible, in my opinion. And hence, when you create a program articulation matrix like this, it may look like this, right? As simple as this. So you have your courses here and the program outcome. So this course 1 has slight degree of affinity with PO1, moderate with PO2, slight with PO4, and substantial with PO6. I have just randomly written it here. This is not a real picture, but just to give you an idea of how the degree of affinity could vary uh, within when a course is mapped to various program outcomes it is associated with. Now the question is, how do you arrive at whether this is slight, this is moderate? How do you define that? And this is going to be a problem here. But what in Inpods, what we show you is how. So this is a semester 1. This is the course, let's say compulsory English. Compulsory English has affinity with PO1, and these are the course outcomes of this course, which are mapped with PO1 with either affinity 2 or affinity 3. It means that it is either moderate or it is substantial. So two of the COs have substantial affinity, and three of the COs have moderate affinity with PO1. Now, as far as the PO2 is concerned, one of the course outcome has strong affinity, substantial affinity, and three of the course outcomes have moderate affinity. PO3 has only one course outcome associated, and there is nothing when it comes to PO4. So now you may want to now interpret this, uh, such as maybe substantial, because first of all the COs are mapped with PO1, because this course has 5 COs, and all the COs have some or the other affinity with PO1. So it means that there is a substantial affinity with this. You may treat this as moderate, but you may also want to call it as substantial. It's basically the according to the way your methodology of interpretation is defined, right? So accordingly, it may end up being called as moderate or substantial, but it is definitely not slight, because there are 4 out of 5 course outcomes mapped with PO2. Now in this case, you may say that this is moderate, because only one CO is there, but it is having substantial affinity, so you may say it is moderate, or you may also call it as slight if you. if your framework defines it that way. So this could be one of the ways of defining the affinity between the course and the POs, looking at how many course outcomes of the course are mapped with the CO, with the corresponding PO, and what is the degree of affinity of these COs with that. So once you create that kind of metric, it is possible for you to arrive at such a explanation about what could be the mapping, right? If you look at how Inpods gives you this kind of, let me try to open it for you. And if you look at the way it is defined here, now English program, and then you have this compulsory English here, and it has got PO/CO mappings. This is the CO. Uh, this is a course, right? Compulsory English 1, and these are the COs of compulsory English. There are 5 COs here, and they have substantial, none, none, none affinity with these POs, right? And then CO2 also has a moderate affinity, CO3 also has moderate, CO4 is substantial, CO4. So this PO has all the COs mapped with it with some degree of affinity, right? And that is what I was trying to show you in my PPT also, isn't it? Here it is. And that's why I may call this as a substantial affinity. So this is the way probably you can actually have from your framework to define your degree of affinities. But unfortunately, it's not mentioned clearly here. So you will have to figure out your own way of converting the interpretation into slight, moderate, and substantial. Now, the next topic is 313 program and course layers for included. So this was only for the chosen courses for your reporting, and this table is for all the courses. So it's same, mapping is same. So again, the interpretation will have to be done with using the same methodology. Now, next topic is pretty complex and requires a detailed discussion and about various terms that you come across with when it comes to computation of course outcomes. So we will have to now go in in depth, and one by one, let's take the criteria there. So 3.2.1, describe the assessment process used to gather the data upon which the evaluation of the course outcome is based. So essentially, if this is a course you are teaching, and these are the various assessments that are going to be conducted by you to gather the data of outcomes. So essentially, there are two broad level categories: direct and indirect tools. And direct tools have your formative or internal assessments and summative assessments, which comprise of these direct tools. So because the teacher's evaluation is essential here. And in the case of the indirect tools, you may count course and surveys, as one of the tools in indirect tools category. Here, the students respond to the questions, but teacher doesn't grade those answers or the responses. So it is typically the opinion of the students that is shared by them about the activity given to them to respond, and that's why such tools are called as indirect measurement of course outcomes. These are the direct measurements of course outcome. That's why these are called as direct tools, and these are indirect tools. So direct tools are formative or summative. Formative means your internal assessments, continuous assessment tests, unit exams, or midterms exams, labs, project. They all fall into the category of formative. And summative exams are end-term exams or your board exams. If it is a affiliated college, they may end up calling it as board exams, which is not, basically controlled by the affiliating university. So these are the tools that have to be identified by the course coordinator for the purpose of gathering the data. And this is the response expected there when you address 3.2.1. Now, when it comes to going further for the computation of the course outcome attainment, various aspects come in picture, which are required to be addressed here. In the 3.2.2, record the attainment already with respect to set attainment levels. Now, this set attainment levels is actually a confusing term here. It should have been, in my opinion, student performance thresholds. And the attainment levels shall be set considering the average performance level. So actually here this term is referring to student performance thresholds. And what they are saying is that average performance levels in the university examination on any higher value set as target for the assessment years. Again, here the word target has come, and that also creates a lot of confusion about what it exactly means. So first of all, in my opinion, this attainment level word has to be replaced with student performance thresholds. And then how this student performance threshold has to be arrived at, they have given the hint here, which is a suggestion, and it is said that you take the average performance levels in the university examination, because first of all, this discussion is about the board or university examinations. Now, when it comes to the private universities and autonomous colleges, obviously this is covered by this is conducted by themselves, and naturally they may end up calling it as end term exams. They may still want but what happens is that in their case they exactly know the students marks for every question, and they know the questions mapping with the course outcomes. So that's why they have better control on the outcomes attainment computation than the affiliated colleges, who do not get the details of students' answers to each question, and that's why they get puzzled about how to use this data for computation. I'll come to that, but let's first of all let me try to clarify certain aspects here in regards with the attainment levels. Now, this is not the only thing that is important here that requires for you to measure the course outcomes attained through university examinations. Target may be stated in the terms of percentage of the students getting more than the uh, university average marks, or more as selected by the program in the final examination. So, essentially, this is the course outcome target. Now, this target is different than this target. Okay, because here that is the confusion that is causing here. So this is the correct target, because once you compute the course outcome, it has to be compared with the target, and this target should be higher than the average scores that has performed by the students in the past. And it is assumed that you are implementing the outcome based education for the first time. That's why you are coming out with some references from the previous performances of the students, and then you consider that as the student performance threshold, and some one value above that should be considered as a target for achieving the student outcomes, learning outcomes. So that's the way it has to be interpreted. Let me explain you it further. Somebody has raised the hands, but I'm unlikely to unmute you because it causes some delay in getting the connections established, and hence it is better to write a question in the question box. So whenever it is possible for me to take a pause and read out your questions, I will address those. Thank you so much, Dr. Venkata. And welcome everyone. Those who joined little late, I see more number of participants now than before. So I welcome. Good morning. Thank you for joining this webinar. So what I'm explaining is obviously is my interpretation. It may vary with your interpretation, but since we have implemented this in Inpods, and Inpods is being used by quite a few universities and autonomous colleges and affiliated colleges already, it is I'm pretty confident that that's the correct implementation. because it is accepted by the customers of users of Inpods already since last many years. So I'm pretty sure that they have used it also for reporting into their NBAs, SSR, SARs, and audits also must have happened. Then naturally, it is pretty well accepted already. So this interpretation that I'm sharing with you is already tested, evaluated by us in the real world. And but however, it need not be the only way of interpreting. You may have another correct way of interpretation, and you may follow your way of interpretation, and it may still be fine, right? What here, the idea here is to exchange some dialogue, some kind of discussion between us, and clarify each other's standpoints, and that's the idea here, right? So here it's basically a two-way learning that I'm expecting rather than a monologue here. Thank you so much. I hope that you understand my standpoint. So the other thing that is important for us to understand here is that further below in the specification in criteria 3, you will find the references of weightages, and this reference will come little later. But since we are here on this slide, let's quickly cover this and move forward. So there is a tendency to take some weightages. These are not the weightages that you typically use for mark sheet generation. Those are different. That's another confusion I find at times. So the weightages that you consider for mark sheet generation are totally different than what we are talking here. These are the weightages for the computation of course outcome attainment, right? And it is typically considered that formative assessment weightages should be lower than the summative assessments. But in my opinion, this should be exactly opposite. It is regardless of whether it is private university, autonomous, or affiliated college. In my opinion, formative assessments are very important because outcome-based education is about continuous improvement, and hence when the teacher conducts first assessment in the semester after covering some syllabus, then it is these assessments become very important tools for the teacher to identify the gaps in the learning outcomes of the students and take the corrective actions as per the gaps found, and see whether in the next assessment the improvements are being found. So that's how the formative assessments could be used ideally to see whether there are any gaps and continuous improvement is happening. And that's why, in my opinion, formative assessment should be given highest weightage in the computation of course outcomes. Well, the summative assessment are conducted, it covers the whole syllabus of the term, that is fine. So complexity wise, it may be higher, of higher importance. But from the standpoint of outcomes based equation, it actually loses a lot of importance by the time the end term exam happens. Because even if you find some gaps, there is no time for you left to take the corrective actions on the current batch. You may be able to do that on the subsequent batch, but the current batch has gone. So that's why summative assessment is actually a very last feedback mechanism for you to see whether all the efforts taken by the teacher during the term are now being reflected in the summative assessment. But that may be important test from the perspective of some other educational decisions, passing, failing, or in some other decisions about the students' performance excellence, but definitely not for outcomes-based education. So, however, since it's a kind of a norm right now that formative assessments have lesser weightages, I'm just showing it to you, but I'm also sharing my opinion about it. Now, as far as the when it comes to, as you know, this whole group is called as direct tools, and it is compared with the indirect tools. And again, there is a notion that indirect tools must be given lower weightage than the direct tools, and that may be right if you are conducting only the course and surveys. Course and surveys are supposed to be conducted to find out to whether the student believe that they have attained the course outcomes defined for that course. Now, this to make the student to respond to this, first of all, they must know what the course outcomes are, what they are supposed to learn, and this communication should happen in the beginning of the course, and then at the end of the course, they are responding to the questions related to whether or not they have learned the expected course outcomes. And it is, since it is not evaluated by the teacher, it is indirect tool of measuring the outcomes, and hence it is called as indirect tools. But in the West, indirect tools are used very effectively for metacognitive knowledge level assessment. So typically, the attitude level program outcomes in the engineering degree programs, out of 12, 6 program outcomes are devoted to attitude, soft skills. And quite a few times teachers ask how to measure the uh, attitude level program outcomes, or those 6, whether or not the student is a team player, or whether or not the student's communication skills are at par. As so, is there any course? How can we measure it? These are the kind of questions come up in the discussion about outcomes based education. At that time, if you think about that, you may actually design quite a few assessments related to the attitude level, attitude category program outcomes. Quite a few of those assessment need not be evaluated by assigning some marks. If the group discussion is happening, and if the students are you will find that some of the students are shy, they are not able to speak out, and some of the students are very aggressive, they are not allowing others to talk. And then there is a middle layer of category of the students who are trying to speak. They speak, and because other some of the students are overpowering their way, but somehow they try to still find out some time and then try to communicate something. So you will definitely find these 3 categories of the student. But those who are keeping quiet and unable to talk, it is basically self-evaluation of the student. They get the feedback themselves. They are smart enough to know that they are unable to talk, and you are just observing that these out of these groups of 5 students, 2 are not able to talk at all, and that's the idea of this assessment, and not to grade the penalize them that here you could not talk and then I'm giving you 0 marks, right? That's not the purpose of conducting such assessment. You may, if you are, you must, or if you are inclined and very much enthusiastic to give some marks, I would say that give 100% marks to everybody, because you are not evaluating, you are not calling a no speaker as a failure. And because the designing of such an activity was to give the feedback to the student, and that's why that's over, your part is over. So that such assessments are also could be called as indirect tools. And then if you are calling such assessments as indirect tools, then the weightage of such indirect tools should go high, because these are very important activities. So again, if you look at the designing of the assessments, if you are going to add some more assessments which are related to metacognitive knowledge or attitude category of the program outcomes related assessments, then in my opinion the weightage should be equal, zero point 0.5, zero point 0.5, because these are very important tools in my opinion. And then in such cases, the outcome based education framework definition will change a lot. And this is the task of the program designer, or the somebody who is given the responsibility to design the programs. This is not a responsibility of teacher to think about. They may contribute later on, as they, after they gather a lot of insight, and they have then they should give the feedback to the program coordinator and designer about how did it go, whether they find any problems, any kind of shortcomings in the way the framework is designed, and they can give this feedback. But primarily they are not supposed to think about it. Somebody else who is responsible for designing the outcome based education framework for each program must think about such things. So that is the way the assessment tools have to be defined. So the to give you the response about what assessment tools have to be considered to collect the data of outcomes, this 3.2.1 is, in my opinion, is the crux of the outcomes based education. If this is done properly, naturally the attainment computation will be done correctly. Otherwise, it will continue to create chaos, and you end up lose the interest in such implementation because it is beyond understanding of uh, every teacher, and then they just don't know why this data is being collected, and just it is only for the tick mark of the compliance of some accreditation. That's fine. Then I'm just collecting it mechanically without giving any thought, and my motivation is very low because I don't know why this is being done, whether there is any use of it, and that is mainly that happens because such a there is no top-down thought process implemented here, and that's the reason the people lose the interest in OB implementation. So if you then implement these weightages, right? So it will the course outcome attainment is computed independently for the formative tools because you want to apply different weightage on it and different weightage on end term exam. So you have to keep the computation separate from each other, right? And then you uh, apply the weight, and then you compute the weighted attainment. Likewise, you are collecting the attainment from indirect tools for CO1, right? And likewise for all other COs also. But I'm giving you the example of CO1 here. And then once again, you have to apply this weight right here. So it's a weighted attainment, and then you get a composite number here at the course level. So when you finish all the assignments that are conducted by you in a term, you end up having one aggregate average course outcome attainment number, which is weighted attainment, and this is what is transferred to the program outcomes after it is converted into something called as attainment levels as per this specification. Next is 3.2 attainment of course outcomes. Are there any questions so far? Dr. Pabla, welcome. Thank you for joining today. It's my pleasure, my honor that you're here today. Sounds good. So I'm moving on. There's no questions so far. So next is 3.2 attainment of course outcomes. 3.2.2 is record attainment of course outcomes. So now we are going to talk about how to compute the course outcome attainment. So there are 6 steps involved. Um, as you know, in outcome based education, you have to map every question with the course outcome, and then the data has to be collected from every question. Unlikely, it is there actually. It's like it is there in the answer sheets of every student. When we grade the answer sheet, we obviously give the marks to each question. But this data lies in the answer sheet. It has to be brought out and make it. We have to make it digital, and that's the effort. Obviously, teachers have to do. One way or the other way, there is unfortunately no, there is no alternative to this, and it has to be brought out of the physical answer sheets to the in the digital form, and for every students every questions marks have to be recorded for the purpose of outcome based education. And that's why we have to group the questions which are mapped to the same COs. So if a course has 5 COs, you may have conducted different assessments: internal, midterm, project, lab, and interim exam, and then you have, let's say, asked 70 questions in all those examinations, and out of these 70 questions, how many belong to CO1, how many belong to CO2, how many belong to CO3. That's the kind of grouping you have to do. Then obviously the computation of course outcome attainment for every question has to be done, and then the aggregation has to be done, just like the way we have done it. uh, and the group then you apply the student performance threshold, compute the attainment, and then you kind of compare it with the targets. So essentially this is the we are going to consider 3 assignments and for the course, and then first of all the first step is to group the questions like this. So there are CO one has three questions, CO2 three has three questions, and then CO3, CO4, CO5 have two questions each. So you have just grouped it, identified the. Obviously, this is to be done right from the first assessment. We have to start computation. I'm saying that group the question is for the purpose of computation of the total attainment, but immediately after you finish the first assignment of the term, the computation has to start. So you don't have to really wait for the grouping to happen first. It is going to happen naturally for the computation of the overall attainment from the course. So we will obviously are going to take the step of computation of first question level course outcome and then aggregate it. So you will come across with three important numbers. The first number is student performance threshold. It could be 30%, 50%, or 60%. Now, how student performance threshold is to be arrived at? Those who are implementing outcome based education for the first time, obviously for them, one of the suggestions given there in the specification is that you look for previous performance of the students in the same exam. So if you are uh, referring to board examinations or end-term examinations, they have asked you to compare the last year's performance of the students and then arrive at the attainment level is the word used there, but actually it is supposed to be student performance thresholds, and these are the averages that have to be computed. Now, it also means that are they talking about a separate student performance threshold for the internal assessments? Maybe, but you know they are not directly referring there, but it's a hint there that you look at the student performance threshold in the end time examination for the previous semesters and compute the student performance threshold for uh, your end term exams. And then when you are computing the course outcome attainment for in from the internal assessments, they are asking you to do the same thing for previous performance of the students in the internal assessment. So technology in imports, we have done that. We have exactly followed this practice, but you may want to keep it same also. It's entirely up to you, and that is the responsibility of the program designer to think about what should be done here, whether we should have separate threshold levels or the same threshold levels. And again, another decision could be whether this should be higher than lower than the internal assessments, and that's another debate that may happen there. But now, for the sake of our discussion here, we are going to consider the common threshold value for internal external, right? And we it may vary from, let's say, 30% or 50% or 60% of the student performance. What it means is that if you are asking a question of 10 marks, which is, and this question is associated with CO1, then if after you grade the students' responses, student may score from 0 to 10, and then out of these students' answers, how many students have scored, let's say, 50% and above, if the target student performance threshold was 50%. And then you have to count the number of students who scored 50% and above, and hence the ratio of these versus, I mean, between the students above this threshold and the class strength will give you the ratio of, in other words, the course outcome attainment for CON from one question. That's the way this number has to be used. And the product of this computation is course outcome attainment. And that also will be represented in percentages, and it could be 0 to 100%. Any fraction number is also possible here, right? And it could be 23% or 41%. So this is another number that is to be handled by us. And the third number is also represented in percentages, is the target CO attainment. So what it means is that this is a threshold above 50%, for example. How many students? Let's say 41% students. Okay. And if the target was 55%, then naturally uh, this is lower than the target. 41 is lower than the target. So it is said that the students did not attain the course outcome defined for course 1 from this question. So naturally, this question was tough for the students. Something went wrong, and that is the interpretation. So these are the three numbers that will keep coming to us, apart from some other numbers that to follow after we kind of understand how to use these numbers effectively. Then there are some other references like weightages, attainment levels will come in picture, and this will further complicate the discussion. But uh, I mean, I can't help too much with that. I'm just trying my best to elaborate and explain what I understood from my various experiences of implementing OB at various institutions in India. And that's what I'm trying to share as much as possible in the simplest language that I could use, and the method of my explanation with the help of this PPTs probably is bringing little more clarity, but it might cause little more confusion also. But I mean, in such situation, probably in the given time frame, this is the best I can do. Uh, so let me take one more step further. This graph shows you that there was a question of 2 marks, which was mapped to a course outcome, and the student performance threshold was 60%. And hence, when I have to find out what is the threshold value, if the maximum marks are 2, threshold is 60%, then 1.2 marks will be the line to be crossed by the students. This is the line. And those who cross this line are said to have attained the course outcome, right? But how many students have attained this? That's the percentage of course outcome attainment. So that's the way it threshold has to be interpreted. So the the if you want to know what is the student performance threshold, this is the way it has to be interpreted and implemented and used for the computation of course outcome attainment. Frequently asked questions: how to identify threshold. So I'm just giving you the same response here, that it should be if you are implementing the outcome based education for the first time, take the references of last 3 or 4, whatever number of batches records you have, take the reference of that and arrive at a logical number. Now what has to be done is, the moment you start the computation in the first time in your current semester, if you are going to start, then immediately after you conduct the first couple of exams, try to find out whether it is making sense to you. If you are getting the course outcome attainment as 85%, 95%, and 99% naturally, you are keeping your target very low. And that's the reason more students are above that line, isn't it? So you don't want to actually, because since outcome based education is about continuous improvement, then if you are already achieving 95%, does it mean that you have no scope for the improvement? Already so many students are there. It's not the right picture, right? You know that. So what you have to do is increase the bar, right? And bring down the attainment to a reasonable level. You may bring it down to even 25%, because outcome based education is not about penalizing the teacher for lower percentage of attainments. If that is happening, it is incorrect interpretation of outcome based education. Outcome based education is meant for continuous improvement. So even if you are achieving 25% attainment this year, or this particular exam which happened just yesterday, uh, and then the teacher will have to think about how to now take this 25% attainment to 26%, 27% in the next exam, or in the next semester when the next new batch will come and learn the same subject or course. Their performance should go up by a couple of notches. And remedial actions being planned by the teacher or by the program coordinator or by the course coordinator are very important from the outcome based education perspective, and not the number, whether the bigger number means everything is perfect, good, fantastic. that is not the right way of implementing or interpretation of outcome-based education. It is about what remedial actions are being planned, how the gaps are being mitigated, and continuously the student performance is improved, is what is more important. And that's why one should not worry about the percentage of the attainment that you are getting. So increase the student performance threshold such a way that you get a reasonable number to work with, and then follow up with the continuous improvement technique, and that is the purpose of these threshold values. It could be different for different courses, obviously, because some courses are very easy, some courses are tough. Traditionally, we know, and naturally, based on that, the adjustment of the student performance could be done by you. You may keep it same also. It is entirely the decision of the program design. It should be a logical explanation behind that, and it should be fine. Every year should not be changed, otherwise you will lose the effect of gathering the data, because you want to compare it with previous batches and see whether continuous improvement is happening or not. And if you are frequently changing the student performance thresholds, then the number will keep varying, and you will never know whether this improvement has happened because I have adjusted the student performance threshold, or really it is happening because of the remedial actions being taken by me. And that's why you should not change the student performance threshold. Once you tweak and fine tune it after your couple of first assessments, you should not change it for 2 to 3 years at all. Just keep it as it is. That's what my opinion is. Now, for the purpose of this discussion, we are going to keep the student performance threshold as 60% for all the course outcomes. Advanced level of outcome-based education implementers vary this threshold for every course outcome also. But let us go with this same course threshold, right? Now, if you look at the course outcome 1, you know that there were 3 questions, right? First question was from test. It was of 2 marks. Second question was of from MTE, which was also of 2 marks. And third was from another MTE, which was 5 marks. So threshold will be computed here for every question. It will, the absolute number will vary because it is multiplied by the maximum marks, and then hence you get the threshold level of for every question, such as this here. And then you have to count how many students have crossed this threshold line, right, for the respective questions. So for question 1, you have the bold letters represent the students, and these are the marks scored by the students. This is a question 1 of 2 marks, right? Threshold is 60%, which is 1.2 marks, and students who are equal or above 1.2 are shown in green, right? We have to now count how many students are above this line and how many students are not above this line, which we know already. And this gives you a ratio 26 by 60, and 43% is the attainment, because 26 out of 60 students are above the threshold line. So this is the attainment computation that we have arrived at for question 1 for CO1, right? And then we have to just follow the same method for other questions as well and arrive at the corresponding outcomes attainment for each question, such as this. And then it's time for you to aggregate this attainment for CO1. For that, you have to sum the numerators, sum the denominator, and compute the ratio. This is 53.3%. Average course outcome attainment we have computed for CO1, which is contributed by 3 questions. Now, whenever the question 1 was asked in test, which must have happened, let's say, in the first 15-20 days of the after the term began, you would have computed this, and you would have known that okay, 43% is the current attainment. And if the target was, let's say, 55%, you know that this is lower already. So you took some kind of measures by that way. By the time the midterm exam occurred, in which there were a few more questions related to course outcome 1. There were two questions, right, in MTE, which were related to CO1, and you can see that the performance of the student was better than previous. So because of your continuous improvement, some remedial actions conducted by you, this must have gone up, maybe, right? So that is the reason it is important for the teachers to compute the course outcome attainment every time the assignment is conducted and evaluation is done, so that you get enough insight about the performance, the learning outcomes of the students, and remedial actions could be planned. That is why the weightages for formative assessments must be higher than the summative assessments, in my opinion. Now, next frequently asked question is: should we not consider students who did not answer the particular question? And these questions stem from the fear of lower attainment. And as I mentioned to you, one must not fear about the lower attainment. That is not to evaluate teachers' performance. The teacher's performance should be evaluated based on the remedial actions and the continuous improvement activities done, and not by looking at the evaluation attainment number. So it should not be. A teacher typically asks, instead of 60, that instead of 60, if we consider 55 students here, because 5 students were absent, then 43% will go up. So is that keeping you happy? But then you have to also then look at question wise, how many students have not answered this question. The reason student did not answer this question, because they were not confident about whether they will get marks, they whether they know the answer, and that itself is a gap in the outcomes, right? So in a way, it has to be measured. The student who did not answer that question have to be taken into account to create the true picture of the student learning outcomes, isn't it? That's why, in my opinion, if you should not worry about the number that you get from this computation, it is not to be considered as a teacher's performance. And once this clarity is established, and this is the responsibility of the program designer, who must bring in such clarity and communicate very clearly to the teachers in the program how what is the important thing here, whether the number to be looking good, bigger, or the number of remedial actions have to be more, and those are very important than the number itself, right? Once this clarity is established by the program designer, such fear will be eliminated. The next topic is course outcome attainment and target analysis. So how to set the target is another frequently asked question. So the most logical answer to this is high jump game, right? And then if there are 5 contestants, typically the referee will keep 3 feet bar depending upon the age group and all that. And then the moment all the participants clear that bar, the bar is raised by a couple of inches, couple of notches, and then step by step elimination happens, and there is a winner then who clears the last bar, right? And then once that is cleared, then only this contestant who is left till the end. Then the next is how far he goes or she goes, right? And then the referee takes the bar further upwards, and then asks this jumper to jump again and again until the time he or she hits the bar, and that establishes the record. So that could be considered as a target. The final number that nobody could clear should be the target, right? And this is how the target should be defined. And again, defining the target is also the responsibility of the program designer. So targets are important. Targets could be defined. There is one more way of looking at the targets. It's not only this high jump thing that is important, but if you go back to your program articulation matrix, let's say this is your program articulation matrix. Here you will see that this particular PO4 has 1, 2, 3, 4 mappings. So out of these 7 courses, 4 courses are mapped with PO4. So what does it mean? Does it mean that the PO4 is very important to achieve? Because so many courses are contributing and associated with PO4. And why? The answer could be yes. Yes, PO4 is important, very important for the students to achieve PO4. Why? Is it because if they perform better with respect to PO4's correct outcome, then they could get a better job. They could get admissions to better colleges for the post graduations, or it is actually very important for them to be self-employed. Whatever, there could be either of these three reasons or all of these reasons due to which PO4 is given a lot of importance, and that's why there are many courses associated with PO4. So if you believe that from this program articulation metric that certain POs are very important to achieve, then you don't want the percentage of the attainment to fall below certain levels. And that could be another input for you to define the targets, right? So the question about how to design the targets also has this answer. Do you agree with me? Right? And so targets cannot be just defined randomly without given enough thought about why this target is important to be achieved. And if that is done by the program designer, then naturally that's a good example of outcome-based education framework. So now in this case, these two program course outcomes are below the target, right? 53 and 50, CO1 and CO2. Until the time it was not shown and compared with the target, you did not notice that something is wrong here, right? Did you notice anything wrong here? Everything is fine, right? But the moment you compare it with something, you will see that, oh, it gives you a different perspective. And then you look for the answers for that, right? So the answers could be here. And the moment you know after the first test was over that CO1 related questions have lower attainment targets, rather attainment calculations, then naturally you will find some answers in the analysis of the question itself. So here you will find that quite a few students scored 0, and that's the reason the overall attainment was low. And then remedial actions could be planned accordingly. That's why targets are important. Then the CO attainment levels. This is another term that is used here in the specification. Let me go back to the spec. Attainment levels, right? So this is what it is. Attainment levels versus targets. Now, what is attainment level here? Attainment level 1 means 60% students scoring more than the university average percentage marks. Average percentage marks is nothing, they are above that average percentage, more than the university's average percent mark. It is nothing but the student performance threshold. Then why only 60%? This is obviously an example. It doesn't mean that you have to stick to this. So 60%, the moment that there is 60% students score above this student performance threshold, that means there is nothing but 60% is nothing but the course outcome attainment in this language. In the language that we are using for our webinar, 60% is nothing but course outcome attainment. And if it is 60, then it should be called as level 1, attainment level 1. That is the interpretation of this statement. But the confusion here is that what should be called if the attainment percentage is lower than 60? Should we call it as 0? The moment, let's say, attainment percentage is 59%, are you going to call it as 0? I don't think it is right. So I think what is missing here is that the attainment level from maybe 0 to 60%, you may call it as 1. 60 to 70%, you may call it as 2. And 70 and above, you should call it as 3. Again, there is a problem here that attainment level 80, then what will happen to more than 80? Are you going to call it as 4? That's not very clear. So this is not very clearly defined, in my opinion. So the way we interpreted it here is like this. This is the way we interpreted it here. Okay. Now in the software, this is implemented as say this university. This is the student performance threshold, right? So you may edit this as per your requirement. Let's say you want to keep it as 55 instead of, you may want to have different here or same, whichever way you want to do it. Right? This is a student performance threshold, and this is a target, and these are the attainment levels. So if you set this here, attainment levels, then the percentages that you compute, attainment percentages, will get converted into 1, 2, and 3, and that is called as attainment level. Okay, so uh, here let's come back to our PPT, and then that will help us now drive this discussion further. So I'm considering the same language. It doesn't mean that you have no liberty to adjust it. This is just an example. They have also mentioned in the specification, and you can adjust it according to your requirements. And then if you go back to our example of the course in which the CO1, CO2, CO3 percentages were computed by us. So this 53 will have to be interpreted as level 2 because it is falling between 30 to 55 here, right? So it will be counted as level 2, level 3 here in the case of CO2, CO3 rather, because it is falling in this range. So these are the attainment levels, and this is what is expected to be computed in the specification, that you arrive at the attainment levels for the university separately and for the internal assessment separately. So you can see here, this is for university, and then here it is for midterm and internal exams to the internal exam. So similar methodology is defined here. So what they are suggesting is that you compute it separately for your internal assessments and the university. So for internal assessments also, you can have a separate student performance thresholds. If you want 55 for university and 50 for internal, or higher for internal, lower than university, whichever way you want to do it, it is possible. The targets also could be different for university and internal. And then attainment levels, you can have different levels for internal than university. And then the conversion of percentages of CO1, CO2, CO3, CO4 will be done using this attainment level computation, and you will have two sets of attainment level, one from internal, another from external, and it will look like this. It will look like this. So attainment percentages, this is one course, right? English semester 1, compulsory English. So you have all the assessments, direct, indirect. Indirect, you have university and internal. So attainment percentages will come here. A level of attainment will get computed here. This is the internal average attainment, 85. The level of attainment has become 2, 45, it has 1. And then you have to apply the weight according to the uh, weightage you want to, your program director has designed. 40-60 or 70-30 or 50-50, whichever way, you will have to then compute the attainment. So here, so far, the university data has not come, so that's why this number is looking lower. And then this indirect attainment is also to be computed, which also will get converted into low level of attainment. And then you have a overall weighted attainment here, right? 1.36. So this is the way the computation is expected to happen as per this specification. And then you start transferring the attainment to the program outcome. So, right, and that is the next step. So here it is. So you can transfer the attainment percentages, attainment levels to the corresponding POs. So here it is 1.36, and it is mapped. PO1 is mapped to English PO1, English PO2 with a moderate degree of affinity. So you can see here CO1 computation has gone to PO1, right? Accordingly, and then you have CO2 computation also going to PO1 accordingly, and then the total average attainment computation is done, which is sent to the program outcomes. And here is attainment evaluation is attainment is transferred from the courses to the corresponding POs. And here is this is exactly as per the um, as it is explained here. PO attainment, every course and every PO's attainment computation has to be transferred here in this manner. So this is how it is done. Attainment transfer is done for every semester. There are a few courses to be covered here, and then finally you arrive at indirect assessment at the PO level. So there are exit surveys, extracurricular, co-curricular activities. These are done, which are mentioned here. Here it is. Just a second, right? So this is the way the indirect assessments have to be taken, and then finally you arrive at the average of the direct attainment and the average of the indirect attainment, and then multiply these numbers with the weightages given there. Once again, there are different set of weightages which are being discussed here. Right? This is 20% to indirect and 80% to direct. Again, these are the example percentages, and based on that, the final time one more weightage is to be assigned, applied to arrive at the final number of attainment for every PO. So this is the weighted attainment of the program outcomes, which is computed exactly as per the framework defined here, more or less, because there are some the interpretations could be different if you start interpreting it. One of the interpretation is what I have shown you, and as I mentioned to you, this is already being used by quite a few private universities, autonomous colleges, and affiliated colleges in India since last many years. So what I'm showing you is definitely an acceptable framework of implementation by the institutions. So I will let, now we are almost at the end of the discussion. So here is what we have done, and I have already explained you this part, weightages for internal board exams, and then you arrive at attainment percentages at the course outcome first of all, and then attainment levels. This is how exactly I've shown you happening in the in Inpods also, and then program outcome attainment. We are transferring the attainments to the respective program outcomes in this manner, and then again direct and indirect tools come in picture. All the courses represent your direct tools, although within the course there is some element of indirect. But when the course outcome is transferred to PO, everything coming from the course is considered as direct. And then at the PO level, there are some indirect tools, which are for surveys. And then those are considered indirect. And once again, the weightage is applied onto this, right, like this. And then you get the final attainment. That's what is done in parts also. So thank you so much for joining this webinar. That's the end of it. I hope that it was helpful to you. If you have any questions, let me know. Dr. Pabla, thank you for joining this webinar today. I have unmuted you. If you don't mind, you can also talk.
Okay.
Jay, feedback. Thank you for your words of appreciation, Dr. Pabla.
Excellent session, sir. Excellent session, very good explanation. I enjoyed sitting in your session. Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope everybody else also enjoy.
Highly appreciate, sir. So I wish you all the best for your implementation of outcome-based education in your institutions. And in case of any questions you have for me, please do write it to me on this number. Thank you so much. Bye bye. Take care.